Hey everyone, it's Sam from Massive Supply Co. and today I'm going to be showing you how to use Displace, my new displacement plugin for Photoshop. So step one is locating the displace.ps.ccx file. This is the file that's going to contain all the information for installing the plugin. Find this file on your computer, you can just double click it. If you don't have the Creative Cloud app already open, it'll open automatically here and the installation process will start. Once Creative Cloud loads, you'll be prompted with this question to install a non-marketplace plugin. You can go ahead and click install. From here, you'll be prompted again just to make sure that you agree to these terms. Just to clarify, Displace will be able to do this, to read and write files on your device. Displace won't have access to any of your files outside of the ones in the plugin folder, which I'll cover in a little bit here. As for these next two things, make and receive network requests and access any devices present on your computer, as of right now, Displace does not have any capabilities to do this. So if you agree to this, you can go ahead and click OK. This might take a second, but Displace will go ahead and start installing. Once Displace is installed, you'll see it in the plugin section of Creative Cloud. You'll also get a notification that it's now installed. So we can jump over to Photoshop and we'll see that Displace has in fact loaded. This is what it's going to look like upon initial installation. The other thing that's going to happen when you install is the plugin folder is going to be installed. In the description or in your user manual, you will see a link to that folder and where it's located on your computer. You can find your way to the folder, and this is what it'll look like. You'll see a Displace followed by the version number here, a folder called icons, a folder called images, and then a few other files down here. I would recommend leaving all of these files alone, as these are all of the code files. The icons are the icons for Photoshop, as well as the logo that's used in Photoshop. The only folder I would recommend that you spend any time in is the images folder. This folder is what's going to hold all of the displacement maps that Displace uses for its functionality. It automatically comes loaded with 20 displacement maps in the Bubbles pack, the Noise pack, and the Scans pack. In addition, there's a user folder with a text file in it. This text file you can ignore and leave it for now. When plugins are packaged for Adobe, Adobe likes to delete folders that don't have anything in them. So this is a placeholder. Keep this folder here. Do not delete this. Make sure that this stays in the user folder. So this is what your plugin folder looks like. And like I said, this is where your displacement maps are going to be stored and where they're going to be held. We'll reference this later. Let's jump back to Photoshop. This is what Displace will look like normally when you first open it if you don't have any projects open. To break down the plugin panel, it's broken down into three parts. The first part is the displacement amount section. This includes the horizontal displacement slider, vertical displacement slider, and each one of these has arrows as well. The second part is the displacement options section, which includes the map type and the undefined space. And then the final section is the displacement map section. Right now, this is empty. We're going to do the final part of our installation. In the displacement map section, there's a load button. Anytime we click this load button, all of the displacement maps that are in our plugin folder are going to be reloaded into the plugin panel. So I'm going to click it in order to load these into Displace. And we'll get hit with a prompt. Are you sure you want to load displacement maps? Now, I will let you guys know that this does take some time to do. If there are a lot of files in your folder, it can take some time to load them. And as Photoshop is loading, it will open each one in Photoshop and it may cause your screen to flash. And so be careful of this. I wouldn't recommend using this load button anytime other than installation or after you've added new displacement maps to the folder. Other than that, this isn't a button you should really ever need to use. So this is going to take a second to do. Really, it'll take maybe 45 seconds to 60 seconds. So I will jump ahead to when the maps are loaded. Okay, so all of my displacement maps have been loaded. It took maybe 60 seconds to load all of them. There was a little bit of flashing with my screen, but everything's loaded in. And you can see that my displacement map section now looks really similar to the plugin folder that I showed you guys. Now what you'll see is that if I click on these folders, that we can see a list of all of the displacement maps being held in these folders. The user folder is unique, and we'll get back to some of the capabilities of the user folder later. As for right now, let me show you guys how to displace your first layer. So the first step is selecting your layer here in the Layers panel. Right now I just have some text that I made, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a map. So I'll come into my Scans folder and I'll grab Scans 12. What you'll notice when I click on it is that it's going to turn white to let me know that this map has been selected. My layer has been converted to a smart object with a smart filter. Now any changes that I make in the plugin panel are going to affect the displacement on this layer. If I increase the horizontal displacement or the vertical displacement, you'll see that my text layer starts getting affected. To give you guys an idea of what's going on, I've brought the displacement map that I'm using into Photoshop and used it as an overlay on my text layer so that we can see how the displacement's actually working. Now if I increase my vertical displacement, you'll see that every one of these units that I increase or decrease, that corresponds to 1 pixel. Every time I go up, we're telling Photoshop to shift my layer this many pixels. So right now we're shifting my layer 456 pixels downwards and 93 pixels to the right. As it's passing through this displacement map, the lightness values of the displacement map are what is going to affect my text layer or whatever other layer I have being affected. So what you'll notice is that as we go through some of these darker areas, my layer kind of just slides through, and when we start hitting some of these gray values or light values, we get a lot of distortion. Maybe we even kind of skip over some of these areas. So you can see that we can really quickly create some pretty strong effects. By using these sliders, we can increase and decrease our values. By double clicking, we can reset our values back to 0. And by using the arrows, we can increase or decrease our displacement amount by some smaller amounts. This might be a little hard to see, so I'll zoom in a little. Anytime we click on an arrow, we'll be increasing or decreasing our displacement value by 1. If I hold Shift and I click on one of these arrows, I'll increase or decrease a value by 10. Sometimes it can be hard to get these sliders and these really specific and small numbers, so I've included these arrows to make it a little easier to get some more specific values. So, like I said, we can click to increase or decrease by 1. We can shift click to increase or decrease by 10. Now let's say I bring another layer into my canvas. Got another text layer up here that I brought in, and I'm going to apply another displacement to it. So I'm going to come into my noise folder, and I'm going to grab noise 8. Same thing's going to happen. We're going to convert to a smart object with a smart filter, and I can start adjusting values. And you'll see, because I'm using a different map, that we're getting a little bit different of an effect. Here's the displacement map that I'm using. Brought it into Photoshop. You can see we're getting more of a noisy, grainy sort of effect. Now, because of the way Displace works, we can click between these layers and make adjustments to either one. And Displace is going to remember the values. It's going to remember which displacement maps we're using on each layer. It's going to remember all the values, and so it can be really easy to switch between layers, make changes. Displace is also going to remember values if I switch in between documents. I'm going to change my displacement amounts first this time, and I'm going to grab one of these, my bubbles pack. You're going to see these values are applied. The displacement map is applied. If I go back into my first document, Displace is going to remember. I'm using my noise. It's going to remember the values of my scan displacement map. So you can really easily switch between layers, you can switch between canvases. If I were to save one of these documents, close it, and reopen it, Displace is going to continue to remember what the values are even the next time that I open it. So it can be really easy to edit. It can be really easy to quickly add displacement effects to our layers. So that's the displacement amount and the maps, how we create a layer, how we edit a layer. Let's talk about the map type in the undefined space. Our map type is what's going to tell Photoshop what to do with a displacement map that is sized differently than our canvas. So I've brought my displacement map that we're going to use into Photoshop. Right now I'm using a bigger canvas, a canvas that's 4,000 by 6,000. My displacement map is only 2,000 by 3,000 pixels. Because it's smaller, we need to tell Photoshop what to do with the map before we apply it to our layer that we want to displace. The stretch option is going to tell Photoshop to take the map and align it to the top left corner and stretch it all the way out like this before applying displacement. So I'm going to set this to screen so that we can see what's going on. I know that this is scans 5, so we'll select that and I'll increase the vertical displacement. And so you can see that when we have stretch selected, that our displacement map is being stretched to the full size of the canvas and then it's being applied to our layer. The other option is tile. So if I click tile, you'll see that my text has been affected differently. What tile does is it tells Photoshop to take your displacement map, this is the actual size of it, and to duplicate it as many times as it can, like this, until it covers the entire canvas, and then to apply the displacement effect. So I'll set these to screen so that we can see what's going on. And what you'll notice if I zoom in, it might be a little bit easier to see, is that our displacement map was tiled and then the displacement effect was applied to our text. This can be really noticeable with some of these seams in the places that our displacement map is tiled. You can see that we get some lines here going in the middle, even one right here in the place where our displacement maps were tiled. And so the map type, this will be relevant if you're working with maps that are a different size than your canvas. Displace can totally handle it. If you click stretch, if you click tile, it'll be able to quickly update and switch between the two. And so this is all going to come down to taste. It's going to be case by case. Let's talk about how the undefined space works. I brought in an artwork that I put together a couple months back that I posted on my Instagram. Post on there a couple times a week showing designs that I've made using my own tools and my own assets from my store. You can head over there if you want to get inspiration, if you want to follow me, and to stay up to date on Displace or on any other products that I'm working on. I've brought this design in here to show you how the undefined space option works. Undefined space is really only going to play a part when we're working with layers that are touching the edges or are going off of the edges of our canvas when we displace. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select one of these from my scans. We'll go back to scans 5. And I'll start increasing the horizontal displacement. So what you're going to notice is that on our edges, we're getting some of these repeated lines because we have the repeated undefined space selected. What repeated is going to do is it's going to tell Photoshop that as our layer is being displaced, to take the pixels from the same side of the layer to continue to repeat them all the way across until it fills the space between the edge of our displaced layer and the edge of the canvas. And this will happen on both sides. When we select wrap, what this is going to tell Photoshop to do is to take pixels from one side of the canvas that are being pushed off and to bring them over to the other side of the canvas. So this can be noticeable a little bit more if I bring some of this down. Pay attention right up here, close to this L in the top right. And as I shift, I get closer to the edge of the canvas, what you'll notice is that as I bleed off of it, it'll start to repeat over on this edge on the opposite side. And so the undefined space, this will really only come into play if you're displacing an object or if you're displacing a layer off of your canvas. We're going to tell Photoshop what to do with all of these pixels that are being shoved off the edges. So it'll work horizontally, and it'll work vertically as well. What I can do after I've applied a displacement smart filter is I can go ahead and I can apply any other effects that I want. Let's say I wanted to add a blur. Let's say I wanted to add a noise. I can go ahead and add those, and Displace will still be able to affect the initial displacement filter. However, Displace can only recognize that there is displacement on a layer if it is the first or bottommost smart filter applied. What this means is that if I have a smart object that already has a blur or a noise or any other smart filter applied, it will not be able to detect that there is a displacement smart filter applied. What you'll notice is that I'm actually changing the effects of my blur currently, and that's not what we want to do. If you're working with a smart object that already has smart filters applied to it and you want to use Displace, what I would recommend doing is either rasterizing your layer and then applying displacement, or taking your entire smart object with the filters, converting it to a new smart object, and then applying a new displacement filter using Displace. Although Displace doesn't have an obvious power button, Displace, when it's open, is always on and is always running. The way that Displace is able to remember values when I click between layers or when I click between projects is that it's always on and it's always listening. Anytime that the plugin is open like this, or anytime that it's docked and open like this, Displace is on and it's listening. That means that no matter what, if I click on a new layer, it'll be able to remember values and be able to make edits. In order to prevent Displace from listening, or if you want to turn it off, you can either close it in the dock like that, or you can close the entire plugin panel. Now Displace is off, and it won't be able to listen between layers. If you have closed Displace and you want to get it back open, you can go ahead to the top, click Plugins, Displace, Displace. It'll be reopened, turns right back on, and we're able to get right back into editing. Now Displace comes with 60 displacement maps. I've got 20 in each one of these folders, but it also comes with the ability to create your own displacement maps. And this can be done in a couple of ways. The first way to create a new displacement map is by going into the user folder and clicking on this New from Layer button. What this is going to do is it's going to tell Photoshop that whatever layer I have selected in my layers panel, that it should convert it to a new displacement map. And so we can go ahead and do that. Got a new layer here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Filter, Render, Clouds. Let's increase the levels a little bit. We'll do a motion blur. And then I'm going to put a brush of white, pretty soft, right in the center, so we have one large section of a really light value. So what's going to happen, since I have this selected in my layers panel, I can click New from Layer. Photoshop's going to copy this to a new document and save it. User 1. This is the first map that I've created, and so it's going to be saved as User 1. And so I'm immediately brought into this document so that I can make any other changes, any other edits to it, anything that I want. But if I go back into my document and I select the layer, select my new displacement layer that I've just created, I can immediately use it as a displacement map. You can see some of the effects that we're getting here because of that big white circle that I have in the center. My layer is being pushed a whole bunch. I can go back into my layer and I can make some changes to this. Let's say I didn't like this big section in the center being a light value, and I'd rather have it be a darker one. Let's fill that in with some black values with my brush, and I will save my document. Now, although I've saved my document, my displacement effect has not been updated yet in my project. In order to fix this, what I can do is I can come back and I can click again, and you'll see that my displacement map is now updated. So anytime you make changes to a displacement map that is being used on a layer, you will have to go back in, reselect that displacement map in order to make sure that the changes are actually effective. The other way that we can create new displacement maps is by using the Make Copy of Map option. So if we come in to one of our folders, we'll go back to Scans 5 again. If I right click on this and I select Make Copy of Map, the same thing will happen. I'll be brought into a new document. My document will be saved as user 2, as this is the second displacement map I have created. And now I can make changes and edits to this displacement any way that I want. So let's do the same thing as we did to our previous map. I'll add some dark values here, maybe some light values here on the bottom. And this I'll go ahead and save. I'll go back to my document, and I can switch my map over. You'll see that this is immediately applied to my layer, and this is saved in my user folder. And so I can continue to switch in between these any time that I want, and switch in between any of my other displacement maps. If I right click, I'll get a couple other options. I get the open map and I get the place map as layer options. The open map I can use in case I ever want to get back to a map to quickly and easily make changes to it. I wouldn't recommend doing this to any of the displacement maps that come with Displace unless you really want to make permanent changes to them. Otherwise, I would leave these alone. If you do want to make changes to them, I would recommend right-clicking, making a copy, and then making changes to a new version. The other option that I have is to right-click and place map as layer. What this is going to do is bring my layer into my Photoshop document, basically the same as if I had dragged and dropped it from my file explorer. So this can be really useful if you're trying to use a displacement map as some sort of a texture, or if you want to be able to see the whole thing to see what's going to be affected within your canvas. It can be really helpful to right-click, place map as layer in order to quickly add texture or see what's going on with your displacement map. Now heading back to the plugin folder, now that I've created some new displacement maps, let's check out the user folder. What you'll see is that the two displacement maps that I've created are both now saved in my user folder. This is the location that all of your displacement maps will be sent to. In the event that you ever uninstall Displace and you want to make sure that you keep these displacement maps, be aware that uninstalling this plugin will remove all of the plugin files. I would recommend taking out any displacement files, any Photoshop documents, and putting them somewhere else on your computer if you wish to save them before uninstalling. Now the last way we can add displacement maps outside of Photoshop is by bringing them into this folder. What we can do is create a new folder, and we can name it whatever we want. For now, I'll just call it custom. I'm going to bring in 3 Photoshop documents and I'm going to put them into this folder. So you can see I brought in one called Displace, one called Test, one called Test 2. If I go back into Photoshop, you'll notice that these haven't been instantly added. What we're going to need to do is click on the load button and click on OK in order to reload our displacement maps. Because this does take a while, I would recommend not adding in 1 or 2 displacement maps at a time, but I would recommend adding them in bulk. Add as many as you can and then come in, hit the load button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll cut to when my files are loaded. Now all of my files have loaded, and you can see that I have a new folder under the displacement map section called custom. If I click it, you'll see I've got my new displacement maps loaded. I can select any of these, and they'll immediately be applied to my layer. This is how you can add new displacement maps that you might already have on your computer to Displace. And that's pretty much it. I worked really hard on Displace, spent a lot of time on it. I believe it's a really powerful tool that's going to change the way that you use Photoshop and the way that you displace layers in Photoshop. If you have purchased Displace, hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you need any further help, please reference your user manual. And if you're facing any further issues, please contact me by email and I'll help you troubleshoot. If you haven't purchased Displace and are thinking about it, you can head to the link in the description and grab it for yourself. Thank you.